Can you talk about the nuclear armaments that Ukraine gave up?
Ukraine is a model of particular interest today when we're talking about nuclear weapons in Iran or nuclear weapons in North Korea. Ukraine showed that it is possible to give up nuclear weapons. Ukraine had strategic nuclear weapons, had tactical nuclear weapons, as we talked about in the early 90s, and made the right decision to give them up. Now, there are some, probably people in this room have heard some Ukrainians say, you know, maybe that was a bad idea. Maybe that was a bad idea. It wasn't a bad idea. That was a very good idea that has given Ukraine moral authority, has shown that Ukraine is a model in this as well as on the democratic side. And I believe that the parties who signed, we were talking earlier on the table about the Budapest Memorandum, which was signed at the time Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in the mid-90s. And the five permanent members of the Security Council, all of whom have nuclear weapons, of course, gave commitments to Ukraine and its security and its territorial integrity. Now, the commitments we should be careful of. The commitment is not to come in and defend Ukraine if it's attacked. That's not the commitment in this memorandum. The commitment is to agree to be called on, agree to convene, agree to meet if anyone, but in particular if Ukraine, feels challenged, feels threatened, its territorial integrity is under question. Ukraine, when it signed that agreement, got the commitment from these other nations, including the United States, including Russia, including Great Britain, France, China, that if Ukraine felt threatened, that they could call and people would respond to that call. They would sit down and meet and talk about the threat. And I believe that's an important commitment that we should make.
In light of the fact that in this next election in January, there's a good chance that Yanukovych may become president and start steering Ukraine towards Moscow, what do you think that the Ukrainian community can do in order to help the U.S. make sure that Ukraine does not become a vassal of Moscow again?
We can demonstrate to Ukraine, the international community, but the Americans in particular, can demonstrate in the situation that you assume how much we care about their continued movement toward Europe. The Ukrainians I talk to, and I imagine this is true in this room as well, whether it's in Kharkiv or Lviv or in Odessa, in Ivano-Frankivsk, around the country, even in Crimea, tell me that they consider themselves a European country, they consider themselves European, and they want to continue to move in that direction, economically, commercially, socially, politically, maybe not on security grounds, maybe not into NATO at this point, but on these other grounds, on these other avenues, they are interested in joining Europe. And I think we, the international community, can encourage that. The Europeans themselves, the EU, the member states of the European Union, has a great lever to address the concern that you raised, and that is, if the European Union would just say to Ukraine, at some point, sometime in the future, you will become a member of the European Union, that would give them, the Ukrainians, the incentive and the goal toward which to move and the reason to undertake some of these difficult economic and other reforms. So they could do that.
Where does the Ukrainian military stand right now?
It's mixed. A lot of the Ukrainian military is not in good shape. A lot of the equipment is old. Much of the force is not well trained. But the parts of the Ukrainian military that have served in international organizations and have served in Iraq. When I was in Iraq in 2004, 2005, Ukraine was the third largest contributor to that operation. After the Americans and the Brits. Ukraine was there for the full brigade. And those soldiers and those officers who served with Americans and Brits and others are in senior positions in the Ukrainian military today, and they are top-notch. They are very good. And there are a couple of units in the Ukrainian military who are also top-notch. And they have served in Kosovo, and they have served in Africa, and they have served in Iraq. And they have, through that training, raised their standards. And they are now at these units at a very high level of training and of capabilities.
Which part of U.S. government is adhering to the strategic patience part so we can work on them?
Ukraine is the largest, most influential, and again, Ukraine as a model, this comes over and over, Ukraine is the leader in that group of 6 Eastern Europe, 6 former Soviet states in this Eastern Partnership. It is entirely an EU-funded and generated notion. The Americans, you know, the U.S. government and Americans, we don't have much to do or say about that other than to encourage it, which I think is a good thing. There have been some in Ukraine who have said, Eastern Partnership, it's not what we want. We really want membership. And I've already said, and people agree, that that should be the goal. But it's also the case that this is a step. This is a first step that the European Union is taking to Ukraine and others. And the Ukraine, I think, ought to take advantage of it. I think they are. I think they recognize that that's the case.
About the recent news that the military defense missile system that was going to be in Poland and the Czech Republic is now being withdrawn.
These people, I imagine, were a little bit taken aback by this change in policy. But I also saw that the Polish Prime Minister, I believe, said, you know, this is okay. We're going to get, we Poles are going to get that Patriot battery that is going to protect us from incoming missiles anyway, whether or not the Americans put these interceptors in. Apparently, the agreement is to continue to provide that U.S. military unit to Poland, which is what they really wanted in the first place. They wanted some American unit on their soil to make them feel protected. They were a little worried that the NATO alliance had not yet come up with specific plans for how the NATO alliance was going to defend Poland and the Baltic states and others from a possible problem like the Georgians had last summer, a year ago summer. So this presence of the American Patriot battery, I think, is maybe will soften that blow.
And we have the Caspian Sea. You can run a tube and a pipeline straight up to Europe, bypass Russia, bypass Gazprom, and take the pressure off of Ukraine and off of Poland and off of Czechoslovakia and Slovakia. And yet, our own government and the Western countries do not support that. And yet, we go into great length to run this ridiculous pipeline up to the Mediterranean, which is the Dead Sea, and God forbid a ship sinks, is going to kill the whole Mediterranean Sea. Why is that?
Why doesn't the United States government respond to Medvedev's letter to Yushchenko? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect the answer is what you hinted at the beginning. That is, we hesitate. The U.S. government, and again, I've retired from it, so I can say this. Now, the U.S. government tends not to want to get into the middle of a dispute or... It's not a dispute. Well, I will take your point. It's a good point. It's not just that letter. There's also this new law that the Russians have passed that allows them to intervene in neighboring countries. This is troublesome. This is definitely troublesome. And I suspect that the only other thing I can say on this topic is I suspect if we do, or indeed if we have responded, we haven't done it in public and probably won't do it in public. But I also take your point about perceptions. Now, on Odessa Brody, the reason is not because of governments. The reason is the commercial volumes of oil to go into the pipe at the end of the pipe down in Odessa are just not there. Now, every time President Yushchenko goes to meet President Aliyev in Baku, or they meet somewhere else, they talk about these volumes of oil that the Azeris should be providing to the bottom of that pipe so it can go to the top of the pipe and turn left into Europe. The volumes don't show up, is the problem. It has to be somehow commercially viable.